Catalina, joined by former Utah and NFL quarterback Scott Mitchell on the radio in Salt Lake City, and he joins us on 365 Sports. Scott, thank you very much for your time. It's pretty obvious that Utah would like to see the Pac-12 remain as one, and I think everybody wanted that. Do you see any crack at all in the armor based on what's going on and even today's news about what might be the base of the TV media deal or linear and or streaming deal?
Yeah, I think if any team in the Pac-12 wants the Pac-12 to stay, it's Utah. I mean, Utah's been to 4 of the last 5 Pac-12 championship games. They've won the last 2 championships. They've been to 2 Rose Bowls. I mean, they've really flourished in the conference. And Coach Whittingham is really hitting his stride, I think, as a coach. He's got every year he just gets a better recruiting class over and over. And so they're the poster child for joining a conference and having success. And yeah, I really get a feeling that they want the conference to stay together. But I really wonder, and I think that every team has to kind of have something in their back pocket. They can't be foolish enough to say, oh, we're going to be, we're all going to be in solidarity here, and we're going to stay together on this, and knowing that, I'm sure they're having conversations on back channels that they probably don't want publicly, but they've got to have an exit strategy or they're stupid. I mean, college football is changing, and you just don't want to be a team stuck with nowhere to go when it really shifts in a line.
Scott, is there any weight behind that Utah and BYU just would not want to be in the same conference together? Because obviously it's a bitter rivalry, but they just, this is, years and years of universities running in the same state where they just have different goals and don't want to deal with each other in that respect.
It's weird because it does get kind of petty like that here. And someone got their feelings hurt. So they don't want the other program to be a part of, their new deal. And they really want to crush the other school. Like I guarantee you, all the BYU faithful are relishing the angst in the Pac-12 right now, and they're loving the fact that Utah might not be in a conference, or the conference may have a media rights deal that's far inferior to what happened in the Big 12. And Utah, on the flip side, most of the folks there are like, it's so nice that BYU's independent, irrelevant, doesn't have a conference. I mean, that there's a real feeling between these two schools. They want to see them suffer, and to me, that's beautiful. That's a rivalry. That's what you want to have. And I grew up with this rivalry. I played in this rivalry. I've actually been a fan of both sides of this rivalry. I grew up a BYU fan, so and I played at Utah, so I get it and I understand it. And it is deep and passionate and hateful, and that's what you want in a rivalry. I can't, imagine having 2 teams in the same conference. And I'm so much for BYU and Utah being in the same conference. You're playing each other late in the year because you always play the rivalry games late in the year, and it's for something. It's for a chance to win the Big 12 or go to the Big 12 championship or whatever, and a college football playoff is on the line. If you're a football fan, who would not want that? Who would not want the excitement of that game, to be in that game, to have it between two in-state rivals? People in Utah, in general, in the state of Utah, are big sports fans and they're big football fans. And these programs have really put themselves in a position to be Power 5 schools. And a lot of schools recruit Utah. I mean, you get Oregon, you get really almost every conference. I believe every conference recruits in the state of Utah. So football is healthy and it's alive here in the state. And Utah, I think Utah is going to have its best team it's had since being in the Pac-12 this year. They're deep at every position, and so the state of football is good. And you want to maximize that ability. So I would love to see Utah and BYU in the same conference.
It is interesting to me, Scott, that in 2021, Baylor and Brigham Young renewed what was a short kind of a stint where they'd played each other. And then that same year, Brigham Young, among others, invited to the Big 12. This year, it's Colorado TCU, and we now know what's happening with Colorado. And Utah plays Baylor, as we know, which will be a hell of a test for both, but especially Baylor off of 6 and 7. And it almost like it all seems to maybe be weird, the way all these renewals or starting of rivalries might be connected to realignment too.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, well, they tried to create a rivalry between Utah and Colorado in the Pac-12. And quite frankly, both schools were just too nice to each other. There was no bad blood. I don't even think there was any bad blood. In fact, Utah probably donated blood to Colorado. Who knows? But it was not a bad rivalry at all. And we used to joke. We called it the Rocky Mountain Oyster Cup. That they're playing for, and it just never panned out. But TCU is interesting, and it's interesting because that was a Mountain West rival for both BYU and Utah, and TCU's actually made some stipulations about BYU fans coming to games, and they know how well BYU travels, and so that's a great rivalry that I think will just naturally kind of fit for BYU. And I think the Baylor thing, at least for BYU, is Jeff Grimes was a coach here at BYU for a few years, and has had great success down there at Baylor. And so he took some of his assistants with him when he went there. So I think that kind of, creates a little bit of a rivalry. Utah playing Baylor, early on, it's the week after they play Florida. So they're playing 2 Power 5 schools in their non-conference. So yeah, it's going to be a tough test. Here's what I like about the Big 12, and this is what I hate about the Pac-12. The Big 12, the schools care about football. I don't care what market. I don't care how good the school is. Predominantly, almost all of the schools in the conference are passionate about football. And you have to be if you're going to survive, because media is driving college football, and college football is king. It's what drives everything in every university's athletic budget. And in the Pac-12, most of the schools are indifferent. They're indifferent to football. They're indifferent to sports in general. You go to places like Stanford, that's an amazing campus, amazing tradition, and they're actually doing well. And you'll have 22,000 people show up in a beautiful stadium in the Bay Area that is full of people, and full of people who are passionate about sports, but they're not passionate about Pac-12 football. And it's a little demoralizing because you got Utah that sells out every game for, here back to whenever. And you get schools like Oregon and Washington who really care, but a lot of the schools just kind of feel indifferent to football and really kind of owning it and getting excited about it. And I love that about the Big Ten.
Scott, if you asked fans 48 hours ago how they felt about the Big 12 and then compared to today, do you think those attitudes are changing with the direction the Pac-12 leadership seems to be, I wouldn't even say going, I mean veering off the cliff in?
Well, what the Big 12 has done, because I remember Oklahoma, Texas leaving the Big 12, and everyone's like, the Big 12's done. Like, who can poach the remaining teams in the Big 12? And which ones would you want? And Brett Yormark came in and instead of kind of reacting to everyone, he got aggressive and he got proactive. And he came up with some great ideas and about thinking outside of the box. And he hand selected some schools, I think, that were pretty strategic partnerships and some savvy picks. BYU's a brand, and they travel well. And they're a program that's committed to football. At UCF, I lived in Orlando for about 14 years, so I watched kind of the rising out of nowhere, the University of Central Florida, and then Houston's in Texas, and Cincinnati's had some success. And so Brett Yormark, the Big 12, they got reactive, they got aggressive, They were like, we're in business, and we're going to go to Mexico, and we're going to go to Rucker Park, and we're going to have a unique pro day, combine type of, and the Pac-12 kind of sat on its hands and said, we're kind of the Pac-12, and you should just be honored that, you're in our presence. And there was no vision. There's no passion. There's no direction with what's going on in the Pac-12. And they're just not reading the room right. And they're just being reactive to everything. And I'm massively concerned with the ultimate survival of the Pac-12.
Do you think it remains intact for another year, or do you feel like that somehow they'll pull this thing out? Because they had the meeting, as you know, Scott, today, and it appears as if a lot of it is streaming with the possibility, but we've heard this for months, linear. And if it works, good, that's great. I don't want to see conferences die, but this one's kind of had self-inflicted wounds. Do you feel like there's enough of a crack, as I mentioned earlier, that if in fact the number is not healthy, or it's not just incentive-laden, or it is too incentive-laden, that Utah might be more interested in moving on?
Yeah, if it gets kind of hairy about, what do you mean by incentive, or what do you mean by subscriptions, or what do you mean, it's one of those things, where they try to, they give you some kind of deal, and then they give you all these like hurdles you have to jump over, and most people go, well, they give up after a while because they just can't jump over all the hurdles. And if it feels kind of like that, where it's, that's almost an impossible task for us to reach those incentives, and or maybe it's clean and clear, and maybe people go, hey, there's potential here to even make more than what we anticipated. And if it's easy, I think they'll stick with. But if it just gets confusing, and it sounds a little confusing, I think understanding, all of the nuances of it, what that really means, and our school's going to have the patience to kind of sort through that stuff. But if the number's close, why would you want to leave the conference if the number's close? I just don't think you would. And I don't think, because of how the college football landscape's changing in the playoffs. If you're a known Power 5 conference, and with at least a certain number of members, you qualify as one of those conferences, which I think the Pac-12 would. Why not be in a conference where you have a legitimate shot at going to the college football playoffs? And maybe you're a school like Oregon or Utah, and maybe the Pac-12 says we'll give like an unequal share of revenue from the playoffs and from bowl appearances, which is something the Pac-12 is entertaining and possibly will do. Maybe you say, you know what, we stay in the conference, we make extra money because we know we're going to go to the playoffs, we know we're going to get big bowl invites, and maybe that makes up the difference than it normally would, and it's enough to keep us around, and then let's see what happens with the next iteration of media rights deals and conference realignment. Scott, if it's just ridiculous, yep, maybe they go.
What is close? Is 31-7 is the Big 12? That's been a number that people have tossed out. It had to be 30. What, in your opinion, would be close? Is 20 too low? I know you're not making the decision, but this is part of your your alma mater. 25, 26. What would you think might be, at least in just your opinion, it doesn't have to be right or wrong, but in your opinion, might be close enough?
Well, my opinion usually is right, but, I'll take a crack at it.
I love it. I love it.
I think, when I hear 20 million, that's what they're getting now. So I think it's got to be north of that. And if they have this linear sub-licensing with ESPN, and maybe it's 5 million per team per year for that, or maybe it's given more weight to teams that actually go on ESPN, like they've got a marquee game with some of the more marquee programs. Because I think Utah's kind of earned the right to be one of those schools. And, if it's, maybe I just wouldn't jump ship. If it's like 28, to 34, a little bit under, a little bit over, I don't see that as something that I would go, yeah, let's just, rip off the Band-Aid, and because there are a lot of good things. I mean, the Pac-12 this season, guys.
Oh, I know.
Is loaded. Like, it's going to be a fun year to watch football in the Pac-12, and so it's not it has a perception, but the reality of the conference and the quality of teams is totally, two separate things.
They might have 3 or 4 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks in the same conference. I can't wait. Utah, Baylor in September. Maybe Baylor, because it's kind of the unknown with who they were after last year. But Utah plays Big 12 type football, even though it's known as a wide open. It's not always that way. Love to see their style and what they've done. Can't wait to see you, Scott. Thank you very much for your time. I know you got your own show to do, and we appreciate your time with us and access.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Scott
Enjoyed
Mitchell, former Utah quarterback also in the NFL. Dolphins